Hello, welcome to the Learning Lab. January is Human Trafficking Prevention Month here in Texas, and we have two very special guests with us here today. We have Debbie Solcher with Children's Advocacy Center of Texas.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And Janet Kasper, Office of the Governor, Child Sex Trafficking Team.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're so glad that y'all are here with us today. I think this is a topic that a lot of people, they either know a lot about or they don't know anything, just when we are out and about and talking about human trafficking. So I'm going to start with the very basic. What is human trafficking?
Yeah, so basically, simply put, human trafficking is a crime using force, fraud, coercion to exploit a person for labor or for commercial sex. And so trafficking utilizes transportation, harboring, recruitment, enticing, obtaining, or really by any means a person for labor or sexual commercial sex.
So one of the things that we hear a lot about is also that there is child sex trafficking or there's human trafficking. So what are the different forms of trafficking?
Yeah, so there's labor trafficking. Those are basically it. The two forms are labor trafficking and commercial sex. And so it's forcing someone by force, fraud, or coercion to perform those acts for you, so that you can benefit from their labor, whether it be labor or commercial sex. It's important to note that the elements of force, fraud, and coercion really don't need to be existent for child sex trafficking. For commercial sexual exploitation of children, commercial sex trafficking, children 17 years and under cannot consent to commercial sex. So that would be kind of one of those things where you don't have to prove those elements. Just the fact that a child is engaged in commercial sex would be sex trafficking, child sex trafficking.
And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't know is that here in Texas, our Office of the Governor has an entire child sex trafficking team. Can you tell me a little bit more about that team and what they are charged to do?
Yeah. So we are a team that was created out of legislation back in 2016. Basically, Governor Abbott, when he was Attorney General, saw that there really was a need for a coordinated effort to address this issue because as a prosecutor, he saw that it was happening, but he saw also that it was very disjointed in the response and that we needed to do something. So he asked the legislature and made the recommendation with the Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force to say, let us do something. So they basically gave, through legislation, the opportunity to create the child sex trafficking team. And our mandate really is to protect, to prevent this from happening, to recognize those that are being exploited, because it's not easy to recognize, and then to recover in a way that's trauma-informed, that really gets them the help and the support that they need, and then support healing, wraparound services. They need lots and lots of support. It's a long journey towards healing. And then justice. What are we doing to bring justice for them? So that's what our team is tasked with, to address all 5 of those elements in our state.
So you noted that there was a task force clearly, and you also noted that he saw that it was coming up a lot, probably on the docket. So how prevalent is it in Texas?
That's a really great question because it's really hard to quantify. Victims who are being exploited don't really outcry. There's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't do that. There's fear, there's that coercion, but also they are oftentimes so bonded with their trafficker, and the trauma can cause them to appear complicit. So they don't really necessarily recognize they themselves that they're victims. So that makes it really hard for us to identify when they're not going to outcry or they don't talk about their victimization because they don't see them that way. But I will say one of the first things that our team did when we were given this mandate was to fund University of Texas School of Social Work to do some research to kind of help us understand what does this look like in Texas. And their research shows us that approximately 313,000 people across the state of Texas have been trafficked, and approximately 80,000 of those, 79,000, were sex trafficked children and young adults. So that's a really big number.
That's a high number.
That's a
Right.
really big number. And so we're doing everything that we can to identify those kids and get them support and services.
So in the community, obviously, I think the first thing that we want to know is who are the traffickers, because we just want to know who they are so that we can say, don't go to them. So who are these, who are the traffickers?
And that's a great question. And it's, again, a very difficult question to answer because they're everybody. There could be anyone. They come in all shapes and sizes, ages, races. I mean, there is no one stereotype of what a trafficker is. We know that there are family members, there are gang members, there are peers, there are romantic partners that are exploiting youth. And so it's very difficult to tell who these people are. So you have to look for everybody. So you're looking for signs of when a youth could potentially be being exploited, and then really look into what's going on and who it is around those people, because you just can't pinpoint who it is, and that's scary.
It is scary. And are there also, though, like at-risk populations or risk factors for trafficking so that, as a teacher or as somebody just out in the community, we could, know maybe this is something I should be watching out for?
Right. Well, there are all kinds of vulnerabilities for trafficking. So, and what the traffickers are especially good at is, and it's called the grooming process, is really figuring out what someone needs, what a youth needs, what they're missing, and they're going to become that. So they're trolling the Facebook pages, trolling social media, Snapchat, looking for people posting like, I'm mad at my mom, or I hate my family, or I feel like I don't have anybody. And so they are targeting those kids that appear to have some sort of vulnerability in that area. It could be economic, emotional, whatever those needs are. Those are the kids they're going to target because they make them a little easier to bring in. Because if you need a mama, I'm going to be your mama. I'm going to be your daddy. I'm going to be your boyfriend. I'm going to be whatever it is you need, because I need you to do what I want you to do at the end of the day. So I have to get you to trust me, and I have to get you to want to be with me and do these things. And that's not, there are some traffickers that obviously kidnap kids and create
force them into doing something
situations.
right away.
Exactly.
But that's not the norm.
That's not the norm.
The norm is what you're saying. So also I wanted to kind of define what that grooming process is. Mm-hmm. Also for any students listening to this, right, as well. So what they're working to do is to get your trust, to provide you with things that you may not have. And those can also be tangible things like new shoes or new clothes or purses,
concert tickets,
just so that they have you and that they've earned your trust. And then that's when it starts. So it's not like you're going to meet someone on the street and they're going to say, hey, go do this for me.
Right. And it could be as easy as, I know you look like you need a friend. You need somebody to talk to, just somebody to be supportive. I'm there for you. I'll always be there for you. Those kinds of things. And
that's where our kids, our young adults, people really need to, because that's a nice thing, right?
Sure.
And so it's like you don't want to instill all this fear that, you got to be careful because everyone's looking to exploit you, but you have to be wise. And so you have to take it into context. Like, they're offering me these things. That's
why
nice.
Are they offering me these
why
things?
are they offering me these
right.
things and have good conversations about it? But, I wanted to just jump in a little bit because something Debbie said reminded me about those tactics to just meet all their needs and that they would pretty much do anything to get that child to even actually become dependent on them. And I've heard stories where traffickers will purposely seek to get a girl pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Because then there's going to be that bond. I'm her baby daddy. She's going to do anything for me. So, it's just really, it's very, very harsh. It's very meticulous, very calculated, and very disturbing.
And I think another thing that youth should particularly watch out for, and especially in the times of technology, is the sexting. I mean, that's how people communicate now, and there's an innocent photo that's shared between what you think is going to be one person that you're involved with, and then that kind of spirals out of control. They get mad at you, then they use that photo against you. It could be they could have gone into it with the purpose of exploiting you with the photo, but it quickly can turn into a really bad scenario, and I hear about that a lot.
I've heard about it where it's someone who's not even associated with the school. But then they know that they go to the school, they get the photo, and one way to coerce them is to say, I will send this to everybody in the school.
Exactly.
Yep.
So that's typical.
I had a friend who someone was doing that to her daughter, and she had intellectual disabilities. So she was very easy to manipulate. And her mother would come to me and say, I'm finding these in her phone. I'm scared. And then she had told me a couple of years before the FBI showed up at my door, and I'm like, you have to take this seriously. You know who this boy is. And so I immediately put her in contact with, a prosecutor, the district attorney's office, who could begin investigating. But I mean, that's so simple, right? It's just, and he was a kid at school. He was
a peer.
He was a peer.
It wasn't someone just off the street.
No,
And
he
a
was a
recent,
peer.
a recent trend is for an exploiter to get a photo of a youth and take an explicit photo and remove the face and put that person's face on so it looks like it's their body, and then they send it to them and threaten them through that photo. And kids don't know how to respond to that a lot of times. And so if they were doing anything before that and then this happened, they're sure not going to come up and say, I maybe did send a photo or whatever. And so it really can put them at risk.
So I've worked in schools and I'm a parent. What are some warning signs that a child could be a victim of trafficking? I want to know both from a parent perspective and from that school perspective.
So from a school perspective, I think that looking at what's going on in the classroom. So is there a student in your classroom that their grades are starting to slip? They used to be straight A, B, and now they're like C, D. They come to school, they're unable to stay awake. You notice that they look a little disheveled, or they smell, or there's some malnutrition going on. Those type of behavioral things. Sometimes that the behavior can be they're upset about something. They get triggered in the classroom and they have an explosive outburst. So it's just anything out of the ordinary of what you see. I mean, teachers are such great persons to be able to identify any change within a kid. It certainly may not be exploitation, but there could be something else going on. And this is a great opportunity to just you have your eyes on that kid a lot of time during the day at school. And if you have a concern, to reach out to a counselor, to reach out to the nurse. If they're wearing clothing that doesn't seem seasonal, I've had some survivors say to me that they're wearing sweatshirts all year round because they're hiding some sort of injury, or they're cutting in lots of instances because that's the way they can control what's happening to their body. And so they were never asked, why are you wearing a sweatshirt in, May or, April even? Of course, in Texas, it could be now. It could be December or January. But looking for any change that you might see in behavior or grades. Also peers, are they hanging around with someone different now that, they've changed their group, they're not participating in extracurricular activities where they once were? Are they talking about an older boyfriend or girlfriend? Do they have some of those items we talked about earlier where you might not think that they could afford? They have a, fancy purse now, multiple cell phones. Are they using language talking about areas of town where something, unshady might be going or shady might be going on? Do you notice any, like if you see them out in a situation and there's an adult with them, is that person talking for them? Are they unable to give information on their own? They have to always look to somebody else for an answer. That could be a sign that they're being controlled by someone. Hotel cards, talking about hotels, taking extended trips, truancy. There's so many things that teachers can look out for. And then parents, the same types of things, right? But, looking for exploiters will really try to make sure that they chip away at relationships, their foundational relationships of youth, especially if they're not the familial people that are actually doing it. But they don't want those kids to have someone that they can turn to. They want to be that only person in that child's life that they are dependent upon. So they chip away at those relationships. So if you notice your child acting a little differently or hanging around with different types of people, sneaking out at night, running away is huge. You're running from something or to something, so we have to figure out what that is. So there are many different little things that you can look for, but just any change in behavior. And it's kind of hard to tell because teenagers, as they grow, they start to pull away. And so, but
I think in the key, like what she says, those changes in behavior, because when you think of them all like individually, I mean, that could be all of our kids at any point in time, right? And that's really scary to think, oh my gosh, my kid's being trafficked because they're doing this. But if you start to see them all kind of together, I mean, that's huge red flag.
So look for patterns.
Look for patterns and look for things that are happening together. They have unexplained access to money. They are, they have that along with, they have older boyfriends. And they have, these new things such as purses that they can't really afford, or multiple cell phones is huge. And they're going places that just don't really seem appropriate. I mean, so if for someone their age, right? And so if you see that kind of all happening together, that's when you're like, okay, this is not cool.
And the key is to ask.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say drug use is also another indicator. So a lot of exploiters will either introduce drugs for control, or that youth may be utilizing drugs in order to just maintain their sanity through what is going on with them. So that's also.
But just unexplained access to that, or even a change in usage.
I think the things that our children have, I think that's also, especially with teenagers, right? Like, I didn't buy you those shoes, and you don't have a job, so how did you get those shoes?
How did you get those nice nails? Like,
exactly.
I didn't pay that money.
I didn't pay those $70
nails.
for those nails. How did you get those? Exactly. So just being aware, and I think knowing what your child's baseline is, who your child is. I think as parents, we do know that. But then when you start seeing those behavioral changes, or those items that don't fit into who you think your child is, right?
And isolation is key, kind of like what she says. That's one of the first things that exploiters will do, is begin to isolate them from their friends, from their family, from the people who really care about them most. And so it's normal for your teen to distance themselves from you. But if they're distancing themselves from you, from their really close friends, from the other activities that they really enjoyed, and then you're seeing these kind of other things, it's like, And in fact, there was a gentleman who contacted our office, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months ago. We just get a random email that comes through, the website. It says, I'm really concerned about my daughter because I'm seeing some of these things. And so found out what region of the state he was in, and then put him in contact with an organization in that region. And that organization actually happens to be led by a survivor.
Okay.
And just said, hey, would you be willing to talk to this dad? Because he's really concerned about his girl. And so anyway, so she did. She reached out. She called him, talked with the survivor sometime after. And she said, it was incredible. Like, I showed up, and she was really hesitant. She wasn't happy that her dad
had
called, and now I have to talk to this person. She said, but we just had a real talk, and then she outcried, and it's already been happening, But the beautiful thing was he saw signs, and the sad thing is it had already happened, but he was keen enough to recognize that things weren't right. He sought help. His daughter got support, and is continuing to get the support. And my hope is that, I haven't followed up. I don't get into the weeds of their life, but I'm hopeful, knowing the organization that they're involved with, that eventually this child will feel safe enough to talk more, and there'll be investigations, and that exploiter will be found. And, but it takes a parent just paying attention and knowing those things and not being afraid to ask for help.
So is that I mean, so as a parent, how do I prevent this? How do I prevent this from happening to my child? I think that's probably going to be the number one question that people will have listening to this.
You talk with them. You have very honest conversations. You don't scare them, right? You talk and just say, look, I know that this is happening. You know, the fact that you're a minor, the fact that your brain hasn't fully developed until you're like 25 means that you're vulnerable for people to take advantage of you. And as your parent, as your mother, someone that loves you, I just want you to be aware that this happens. I don't want you to be scared, but I just want you to know that this does happen to people. And by you knowing, you can be proactive and you can begin to protect yourself. So, some guy comes and is talking to you. I mean, that's great. That's normal. But pay attention to some of these things. And if they start to try to put pressure on you to do, our office did a campaign last year, the Real Friends Don't campaign. It was, and it's like, real friends don't ask you to do this. Like real friends, she talked about sexting. That's very it's depressing in my opinion, how popular that is. Like I went to I think it was a Crimes Against Children or a conference actually a couple of years ago. And the statistics that they quoted, I mean, they might have well have just said, if you're a minor, you've already been sexting, right. I'm like, that's depressing, I don't want to think about it, but that's the reality.
Well, it's what you just said. I don't want to think about it, but as a parent, we have to think about it. And then not only do we need to think about it, but then we have to start having conversations with our children.
And not to scare them, but to protect them, to give them the confidence and to have them to begin to develop those critical thinking skills. And if someone's asking me to send those pictures, let me think really what could come from that. It may be fun for the moment, but how well do I know this person? How well do I trust this person? And how easily can they manipulate me?
By having that picture.
And it's just getting them to think critically. And then also setting the stage that it is okay to talk about this stuff. Sure. It's okay. You can talk to me. I'm not going to get upset with you. Maybe in the heat of the moment, you did something, you regret it. But, I just think open, honest conversations, not in the spirit of fear, but in the spirit of this is reality. And you need to know this so that you can protect yourself.
And I also think that, in the research and what we know about exploitation and vulnerabilities, that protective factors are really where it's at. And so we have to create those protective factors for kids. I mean, as a youth, they're going to go through vulnerable times. I mean, it's not always going to be great. I remember that from couple of years ago when I was a kid. It's not that fun because we're still learning how to react to our environment, and sometimes things don't go well. And so, if you as a parent don't have that sort of relationship with your child, making sure that they have someone in the family or a trusted adult that they can go to, but there's a safety plan or safety net, if you will, in place. And really having those conversations, like Janet said, around, when you're feeling bad, how can we make you feel better? How can we help you? How can we help support you? What do you need to put in place? Making sure that you keep up with the technology that they're using. That's just so critical. And, us being, digital immigrants versus natives that they know the back door for everything. And so we really have to try to stay on top of what's happening with the technology. And not that we need to know every single app. I don't know that we could if we wanted to.
Because there'll be a new one the
and
next
they'll
day.
hide them,
Yeah.
Sure.
But reaching out to, like, NCMEC has a lot of technology.
Okay, what's NCMEC?
National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Okay.
So they have a lot of information and resources for parents on technology, exploitation connected to that. And I think it's really important for parents just to know that you may not be able to know everything, but there are certain things that you can teach your child. You can talk about those privacy aspects. You can talk about, sharing the sexting photos and all those kinds of things. And we know that kids are going to make mistakes. And I think the biggest thing is, not having that look on your face when they come to you and share something with you,
Poker face it.
but really try. You inside, you may be screaming inside, but
Don't freak
you
out.
really need to make sure that you show that united front with them, because they're learning. And so we may have an expectation that they shouldn't do these things, but they're going to do them. I mean, that's just what life is about.
So would we say now, I mean, I think as parents, we always used to know we're going to have to talk with our children about alcohol. We're going to have to talk with our children about drugs. We're going to have to talk with our children about sex. Sex trafficking now is up there as one of those things you need to talk with your child about.
Sex trafficking, sexting, sextortion, internet safety. I mean,
Everything.
it's healthy relationships. You could sum it up under really healthy relationships. Real friends don't. Real friends don't ask you to do this. Real friends don't do that. Real friends don't isolate you from your family. If your family's loving and supportive, they're not going to, I mean, let's just, again, you got to educate them on all that.
Yeah. And then what happens if you do this?
Yeah.
What are some steps you can take? How can you mitigate this damage? And I'll be there for you.
So those are those protective factors.
Yeah.
What, and I think we also all know that those are things that parents can do, but we are also very much aware that there are children who don't have those parents. And I think a lot of times that's when we look to our schools, because they see our children sometimes more than we do, right? So what are some of the things that schools can be doing?
I think that teachers, again, it's with the, watching what's going on with students and recognizing when you see those changes in behavior, just being there. Lots of times I'm a former teacher, and so kids would come to me if they felt a connection with me, and they would share things with me.
Right.
So I think just listening and then responding to them in a helpful way, and then doing whatever else you need to do, as if you need to report that or whatever, we have to make sure we keep up our reporting requirements, and then assisting that youth with getting some help if they need it. The one thing I would say is that we shouldn't investigate any types of cases or incidents where we feel like there's something going on, because it could be a threat to us. It could be a threat to that youth. If it's a family member or someone very close to them they're going to after school, but it also could impede investigation. And so reporting those types of things to the DFPS, if it's rises to that level, or to the school counselor, the nurse, the principal, whatever your protocol is for your school.
And I just want to add to that. I mean, yes, all of that. But there are programs, if school districts or individual schools could provide some type of programs that could really support kids in the sense of like having mentors and things such as that. Research tells us that the number one protective factor is a healthy, safe, trusting adult. Relationship. That's the prevention, and it's also the healing. It's what, once that has happened, it's what brings them out of it and sends them on the road to recovery and healing. It's a trusted relationship. And so and that's the prevention for really any negative thing, right? And so I've seen schools, and gosh, I would love to give them a shout out, but I haven't talked to them. I'm just going to do it. Project Mentor in Montgomery County, Conroe ISD School District has a mentoring program that is amazing. And that school district has designated a full-time person and a part-time person to develop that program for their district, because they have seen just outstanding outcomes. In fact, I know a young girl who was mentored through that program through grade school. She met her mentor. She's graduating this year. She just got accepted into Harvard.
Oh, wonderful.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But it's having those relationships and people that can, do those things that maybe you would do for your child. But even, kids who have parents, and there's just, as Debbie said, sometimes there's that kids are going to withdraw from the parents. That's normal and that's okay. And parents, you want to be concerned to a certain level, but as a parent, I always looked for opportunities for my daughter to have people that I trusted in her life, because I knew that there are times that it's not going to be cool just because I said it. Right. But if there were other people that I trusted that were adults that could reinforce. And so I would say anytime a school district can have mentoring programs and things such as that will help protect kids from falling prey, not only to sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, but all the other things that they're at risk for.
I know communities and schools and boys and girls clubs do great things in the community around schools.
One thing that I've heard is, something doesn't seem right, but what if I'm wrong? Right? Because that's a heavy accusation, right? And I think one of the things that we've heard in the past is I just wasn't sure. And one of the things that we always say is if you're not sure, there's obviously still that red flag. Something came up to give you some point of unease. So start asking those questions to find out if that is something you need to report.
Yeah, and to even just be careful too when you ask those questions. Remember, it's not your job to investigate. It's not your job to determine if it's true. It's your job to report if you suspect.
There you go.
And actually, our law says, if you make a false report unintentionally, if you're making a report and you're wrong, there's no harm, no foul. Right? But if you know something and you don't report, then actually you're held accountable.
Right.
Now whether, typically no one's knocking at your door and saying you knew this and you didn't do it. But our law says that everybody in our state is a mandated reporter. If you suspect something, report. It's not our job to investigate. If there's nothing there, there's nothing there.
So we're talking about, I think we talk about the school realm, and school people know that. Yeah. But what you just said was everybody in the state of Texas.
Everybody in the state of Texas is a mandated reporter.
At the grocery store.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. So who would they report that to? Because I think school people are trained. We know who we're trained every year. If you suspect child abuse, neglect, whatever, here's who you report to. I don't think every community citizen in the state of Texas knows that. So who would then they report to?
They would report to statewide intake, DFPS, Department of Family Protective Services, or they can report to local law enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's also the National Human Trafficking Hotline that they can report to as well.
Yeah, and then we actually have in our state, this came out of, was it the last legislative session or the one prior to?
The second one, I think.
Yeah. Where actually, we have mandates that we have signage throughout the state, and different places have to have signage. And so, there's the human trafficking hotline there, but then we also have iWatchTexas.com, and that is answered by our DPS, our law enforcement, and we saw this to be beneficial because you have a law enforcement person that is picking up that call, and if you have a tip, you're speaking to law enforcement who can ask some of those investigative questions and hopefully get more of the type of information that they need to better be able to look into and investigate that case. So, so there's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. There's iWatchTexas.org. And I should know that.
And actually in our last legislative session, we also had to where now people are going to start seeing more of those signs at schools as well, because now schools have to put up those signs. I think in the past they were always mandated, like at beauty salons and nails. I know we would see them there, but now the schools are also now mandated to post
hospitals.
those signs.
We're getting the word out in Texas.
We've seen it at the airport.
Airports.
I saw it recently at an airport in the bathroom, and I was like, oh, look, there we go. There's all the reporting.
Department of Transportation now has them in every recreation center around the state and all the Texas vehicles.
So all of the signage kind of goes back just because it is happening. We can't put our head in the sand and think that
we got to find those 313,000
That's right.
if that number is accurate. We don't know.
Or it's probably more.
Yeah.
We know. And so we talked a little bit about Texas. Are there other federal things that are happening that can assist Texans with this crisis, really, of human trafficking?
Do you want to?
Go ahead. And
so we have.
I'm just thinking of the hotline.
Yeah. So and I'm trying to. Well, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is a national line, but The Department of Justice funds task force across the country. So there are local, federal, state task force that work together, and which is really nice because, as we know, those who are being exploited, who are being trafficked, they're transported. Right. And so they'll go from one county to another county, but then they'll also go cross state lines. Mm-hmm. I work a lot with people in East Texas, and they have kids going back and forth from Louisiana and then to Mississippi, Texas, California, up through Dallas, Oklahoma, and come back. And so they all work together. And so I would say if you're suspecting, you can reach out to iWatchTexas.com. And they are networked. I mean, what I like about that is that's state police too that can, so if it's crossing jurisdictions across the state, they have jurisdiction to be able to work with the locals and do what they need to do.
And they can just Google iWatch. You could just Google iWatch Texas.
Yes, iWatch Texas. And if you Google iWatch, you're going to get a watch.
That's true.
There's an app too that you can download on your phone and then make reports.
So we've talked about, if we suspect, and that we're all reporters. But what resources are there for those who are being trafficked, and what resources are there for them once we now have recognized and we know they are being trafficked?
So again, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has curated a list of all the state resources. Most of them, I would say that there's probably a few out there that are not listed there, but they can contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they can give their zip code, and they will give them a list of resources within their area. And then, like Janet was talking about at the beginning, the governor's office team, Texas is a big state, and so we need everybody we can get to be part of this fight against exploitation. And so what they did a great job of was connecting a lot of state partnerships, including with my organization, the CACs of Texas, which is the Child Advocacy Centers of Texas. And our organization is it provides the pass-through funding and technical assistance for all the 70 child abuse centers in the state. And so
70. Okay.
And so these centers are located around the state, and they provide resources for all the youth who have been abused in the state of Texas. So all the reports that come in for child abuse, exploitation, or other child abuse, physical, sexual abuse, go through the DFPS statewide intake. They also get copied to the CAC of Texas, the CAC in that local county, along with the local jurisdiction of law enforcement. And so they will review those, and then they provide all the forensic interviewing. They provide mental health services free for families and youth that are experiencing problems around abuse. So
what she just described is called care coordination. Okay. And so that's our statewide response to the recovery and support healing. So, and also it's intertwined with Bring Justice. So when we talked about kind of our 5 goals of the child sex trafficking team. And so we do that through a very, very close collaboration with CACs of Texas. Debbie and I get to work together a lot. We're actually really good friends, so it's really fun doing this with her. But to develop that and make sure that that's happening across the state. So we have, in our office, we have what we call regional administrators, actually regional advisors is what they're called. And we have one in North Texas, Central Texas, East Texas, South Texas, West Texas. And so they work with the local children's advocacy centers in collaboration with Debbie and their office to develop this coordinated response, so that when a child has been recovered, maybe by law enforcement or in a crisis situation, or has outcried to a teacher or to a professional or to a counselor, or you suspect it and make a report, whatever, however they're identified, then there's an opportunity, as Debbie said, for them to get, the support from the local children's advocacy center. But what's really cool about that is they're called care coordinators. These people within the local children's advocacy center is coordinating law enforcement. They're coordinating the medical professionals. They're coordinating what we have in Texas is called CSA advocates, commercially sexually exploited youth advocate. That is another big part of our model for Texas because, as if you recall, I said earlier, it's relationships that protect and prevent, but it's also relationships that heal and bring people out. And we know that a very intense trust-based relationship is what these kids need because, unfortunately, they are very bonded to that exploiter for lots of reasons. When a child is recovered, you can pretty much expect that they're going to leave and go back, and they're going to be recovered multiple times because as horrible as it sounds,
before
an average of 7 times
because that bond is so strong, and at least and they're like, at least I knew what to expect,
and now I don't.
And there's that whole, but they do care about me. It takes a while to help them see that's not healthy. That's not caring for you. And so advocates kind of help with that. And their goal is to break that bond and help them to form a healthy attachment so that the healing can take place. And then they help integrate them, back into the systems that are healthy. And so they work collaboratively with the other partners. And the CAC, the care coordinator, is the communication. We liken them to like an air traffic controller, right? There's a lot of things happening when someone is recovered and law enforcement needs help. They need that advocate to respond on scene to begin to support that child, help calm that child, because a lot of times they're very escalated and they don't like law enforcement. They've been taught that they're actually going to criminalize you. It's your fault. They're not going to trust you. And so that advocate is coordinated by the CAC. And they get out there, they go, they're not part of the CAC, but the CAC contacts them on behalf of law enforcement, or they have different protocols to make sure that happens. And so there's a whole system being developed across our state. And we have 17 care coordination teams to date that provide this type of care for approximately, I think it's like 57% of the state's population. And we have approximately 80% of the state's population covered with CSA advocacy. So we're super excited about that.
And so we hope to have all 254 counties covered, and really need to strengthen our relationships with schools, especially in that reentry period for when the youth go back to school.
And what's needed? Like, what do you think? How can schools assist with that?
I think reaching out and creating relationships with their CAC, asking for help if they need it, making referrals, and really just, they can provide education too on this topic to teachers and to youth as well. So I think really having a strong relationship with their local CAC is the way to go.
And making sure that this conversation is taking place. Right. It's not a taboo conversation that we don't want to have with our children and with our youth, but letting them know that this is out there, and friends don't do
real
this.
Friends don't do this. That's not. And one thing we haven't mentioned is the commercial sexual exploitation identification tool. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's a mouthful. So we say
I have not.
It's CIT, Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool. So another part of our strategy is to recognize, right? How can we recognize kids who are possibly being exploited? And so we did a lot of research to see what tools are out there to help us, and learned through that process that West Coast Children's Clinic has created this tool. It's a validated tool. It's I don't want to say the only, because I don't know if anything else has been validated since then, but it's the most researched tool to identify kids who may be at high risk for exploitation. And so we've began training people across our state in that tool, using that tool. It's not a diagnostic tool, but it's a screener to say, and it has all of these indicators, those risk factors that Debbie did such a good job of describing. And so school personnel can be trained in that tool. And as they begin to gather information about their child or their students, it takes about 3 minutes to just complete this questionnaire. And if they score in what we call that clear concern category, then then they would call statewide intake and they would report that.
They would do that reporting so that the investigation could take place.
Correct.
And so so schools who aren't using that yet, there are only a handful of schools across the state, districts, who have now adopted that tool and are beginning to use it. But that's something that both Debbie and I could help. But West Coast Children's Clinic, you can Google that, see it, commercial sexual exploitation identification tool. You
And
can go to
there's
our
also a
website.
website,
Yeah, I forget. We have a website.
And we'll make sure we link to that on our website
and then
as well.
and you could request information, and then our office could connect them with that tool.
Well, this is truly a learning lab. I usually think I know most everything when somebody comes in, and I was like, I did not realize that a child would on average go back 7 times to their if they get out. And so I think when we start understanding that, we can really make that connection of it really is a mental behavioral abuse that is going on, because that's what we kind of talked about when they start the grooming. That's the whole point of that grooming process.
It's complex PTSD. I mean, it's very layered.
And as you can see, when you have someone that's returning that many times, why they appear complicit.
Sure.
And a lot of times people are like, well, they just want to do this. They're promiscuous.
Right.
They like sex.
Why do we?
So why? I mean, you want to do this. Well, guess what? The law says they cannot legally consent. You still need to report it. And we have got to meet them where they're at. This is the trauma. That's a trauma response. And we need to stick with them and help them get to the other side, because they can and they do. They do. It's really beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of the different resources that are for us here in Texas. And I know here at the Texas School Safety Center, I think we want to work to bring more trainings about this because it is just so prevalent. And we do know that there are tools now that we can train on and give people the tools in their hand to know, because I do think that is a concern sometimes for people. I don't want to be the one and get in trouble. But just like you said, it's better to report.
If you see something, say
something.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, our jobs aren't investigators. Our job is just to report.
Exactly. Well, thank you, ladies, for being here. We appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing more next year about all the things. Hopefully we'll be at 100%, like you said. And we look forward to having you back. And as things come up and you think it's something that our audience needs to know about, please let us know and we'll have you back on.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great. Thanks.